Welcome, everyone. My name is Nisha Ramachandran. I am the chair of Desis for Progress. Thank you all for joining us at our fourth annual Congressional Roundtable. This is one of my favorite events that we do every year, and unfortunately we missed last year because of the pandemic and everything just kind of starting to move to a virtual reality. And so I am thrilled to be moderating the conversation this year. A couple of things before we get started. Obviously, given a lot that's going on in everyone's lives between the president speaking later this evening to everything we're all dealing with the pandemic, both here and abroad. I really appreciate all of you taking the time and joining us. A couple of things that I just want to start out and remind folks, if you have a question, you can use the Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We are also tweeting through this, so you can follow along on our Twitter, which is Desis for Progress, and you can use the hashtag #WeAreDFP. With that, I know we have a lot to talk about and a short amount of time. So let me start with introducing Congressman Bera and Congressman Jayapal, who are here with us today. Congressman Krishnamoorthi will be joining us a little bit later. And unfortunately, Congressman kind of had a scheduling conflict come up and so won't be able to join us this evening. That said, let me go ahead and start with Congressman Bera. Congressman Ami Bera is from the 7th District of California in Sacramento County. He has been in office since 2013 and is the longest serving South Asian American member of Congress. He's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and is chairman of the subcommittee on Asia, the Pacific, Central Asia, and Nonproliferation, and also is the vice chair of the New Democrats Coalition. I should also note, he is also my former boss. I had the honor of working in his office for a few years, a couple of years ago. More than a couple of years ago, I think, in 2013 and 2014. Congresswoman Jayapal is from the 7th District of Washington, including most of Seattle. She was elected in 2017 and is the first South Asian American woman in Congress, as well as one of only 14 naturalized citizens serving in Congress. In addition to serving on the House Judiciary Committee as vice chair of Immigration Subcommittee, she is also the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Both of them serve as executive members of CAPAC, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. And we are just so delighted that both of them can join us again today for this conversation. It's something that we all look forward to every year, and I know many of you watching do as well. And so with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? The first question for both of you, and I think my moderating role is just to make sure we're moving along, but I know you all have a lot of great insights to share. Can you both just start by giving us, just a quick, brief overview of your path to Congress?
I was letting Ami go because he's our senior member. So
okay. I'll go and start, but I forgot to unmute myself for a moment. It wasn't a straight shot. When I was growing up, it wasn't like one day I want to be a member of Congress. My parents immigrated here in the 1950s. We were a very close family, and again, I think like a lot of South Asian families, education was emphasized, and I'm a good Indian American kid. I went to medical school, so you check that box off, and I thought I'd practice medicine, but kind of all along the way, I was practicing. I did see a lot of inefficiencies in how healthcare was delivered, and fairly early in my professional life, became medical director of a 5-hospital system to really look at ways to improve the efficiency of healthcare. That led to my going over to the public health side as chief medical officer for Sacramento County, because I really did see that the 4 health systems here in the Sacramento region, saw each other as competitors, but was there a way to bring them together to address some community-wide challenges, whether those were workforce issues or at that time, the 225,000 uninsured or underinsured Sacramentans who really had limited access to healthcare. So did that for a while, and then was dean of admissions at UC Davis's medical school. So really kind of looked at the workforce training side of things, and got very interested in how we educate healthcare professionals and doctors. And then there was this senator from Illinois that in 2007 decided to run for president, and it was really the first presidential campaign that I threw myself into. And when Barack Obama got elected in that November day in 2008, I knew he was going to work on healthcare. And I could sit on the sidelines, or I could try to get in the game, and had this crazy notion of running for Congress, and started talking to folks first with my wife, and she just looked at me like I was nuts. And and then I knew most of our local electeds, and chatted with them. And to a T, they all said, with your background and experience, you'd be a great member of Congress. And then in the next breath, they would say, why don't you run for city council? And really what they were saying is, you've never run for anything. You don't have this donor base and so forth. Why don't you start by running for city council or board of supervisors? And in truth, if we were going to fix the healthcare system and address it, it wasn't going to happen at city council. It was going to happen at the federal level. So, they were all, telling me the truth that this was going to be a hard path. But I put myself out there, and some of this is serendipity. 2009 was when the Affordable Care Act was being debated, and it was probably a good time to be a doctor running for Congress, because a lot of Democrats were not doing town halls and doing the interviews, because it was a heated period of time that summer of 2009. So we leaned into it and talked about it and addressed the issues and challenges with American healthcare. And our campaign really did gain some national notoriety, momentum, and just wasn't a good year to be running as a Democrat in 2010. I learned a lot along the ways. I did not win, but I felt like we won on every metric. And then it ran again in 2012 and got elected. And I always ran on my family story as a family of immigrants, the values that we were raised with, the importance of the chance that my parents had, but also the importance of giving back. And to me, it's a seminal American story, because we are this nation of immigrants, and never ran away from who I was or my background, because again, I think the strength of our country are these different religions, traditions, the cultures all coming together. So that's my story. Let me turn it over to Pramila.
Well, thank you so much. It was so great. And Ami was really supportive when I ran for Congress. So I've always been grateful for that, and for his holding down the South Asian sort of space for us all to come. Well, it's Nisha, thank you so much for inviting me. This is always a great event for us as well, to be able to talk to our Desis across the country that are thinking about these issues. For me, it was also not preordained path at all. As you mentioned, I am an immigrant. I was born in India. My parents still live in India. They took their last $5,000 and sent me to the United States by myself when I was 16 years old to go to college. And I was not a good Indian daughter. I was supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer, or a business person. Those were like the three accepted professions. And when I got to college, I was at Georgetown University. I was supposed to go into economics. My sophomore year of college, Ami's heard me tell this story many times, I know. My family only had enough money for me to call home once a year. And I used my one phone call to call home from the dorm phone and tell my dad that I was going to be an English literature major instead of an economics major. And then I had to hold the phone away from my ears. He yelled at me and said, I didn't send you to the United States to learn how to speak English. You already know how to speak English. And so I promised him, I was scared of him. I promised him that I would get the same job with an English degree that I would have gotten with an economics degree. And I went to work on Wall Street in leverage buyouts in the mid 1980s when Mike Milken was king and junk bonds were really hot. And it was an incredible training experience for me. It really taught me a lot about the business world. It made me confident about spreadsheets, about numbers, which actually ended up serving me in all kinds of ways later in life. but I didn't like it. I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. And I didn't quite know what to do. So I went to business school. I went to graduate business school at Northwestern University, the Kellogg School of Management. And because it was sort of like the next thing to do was to go get an MBA. But while I was at business school, I met an amazing woman named Mary Houghton, who was doing economic development work in the South Side of Chicago, running something called Shore Bank. And they were really investing in the South Side of Chicago and doing economic development, micro lending, all kinds of stuff that I found really interesting. And I was like, well, maybe I can use my business skills for good and do something that I care about. And so, you know, my father's heart again is thumping as I tell him, I'm now going to go to Thailand and work along the borders of Laos and Cambodia in refugee camps, counting chickens and figuring out how rural economies work. You can guess how well that went over. That was the summer of business school. But again, that was an amazing experience. And I just wrote about this in an op-ed talking about the refugee cap, actually. And that was really where I got my start of understanding what the refugee resettlement system was and how refugee resettlement worked. I came back and still honestly wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So I got a job in Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, selling defibrillators, cardiac defibrillators. And why, you ask? Because that company was trying to train people for management and they rotated people around the different regions. Well, they had never seen a brown woman in that sales department. They had definitely never seen somebody, you know, who was an immigrant. And so I stayed long enough to beat all the records of the guys. There had never been a woman in that district either. And then I decided to leave. And that's when I left and started working in the public sector. And that's really where I had so much joy, working for nonprofits, doing international development work, working for an international health organization, running a major loan fund that made loans to public health projects around the world, including in India. I then went on a 2-year fellowship to India and lived in villages. So you can see none of this was linear at all. And every step along the way, I was sort of looking for what it was that was going to make my heart sing. And I came back from India and 9/11 happened. And that probably was the beginning of my trajectory into the political world as I think about it now, and really the organizing world. I became a community organizer. I started an organization that grew to be the largest immigrant advocacy organization in Washington state, one of the largest in the country. And as I started working with legislators, I realized that there were just too few people that looked like Ami and me. There were too few people that represented our experiences. And I always had thought that I was never going to be a politician. I mean, I was like, I'm an activist, I'm on the outside, this is where you make change happen. But the more I tried to get changes made on immigration, on many other things, and we were quite successful, the more I realized we need to be at the table. And the issues that I cared about were also federal issues. But I wasn't sure I was going to like politics. So I decided to run for the state Senate kind of on a whim. And I won and spent 2 years there. And then this role opened up. And I thought, well, I think I'm going to run for Congress. And I had the same experience that Ami did, where people said to me, oh, that's so great, you'd be wonderful, but maybe you should think about staying in the state Senate and getting a little bit more experience. You know, you have to raise a lot of money. Washington state had never sent a person of color to Congress before. And so I was the first person of color to come to Congress. I had been the only woman of color in the state Senate, and I was the first person of color that Democrats had ever sent to Congress. It was a tough primary, but I can never say that with Ami on the call, because he always won his races by like 4 votes or something. So I forget what it was, but in the grand scheme of my life, it was a tough primary with 9 candidates, and we too have a top 2. So it was tough all the way through. I ran against a Democrat all the way to the end. And I just feel so grateful to be here, because my theory of change is that we need organizers on the inside and the outside. And I have spent my time here, you know, really organizing the Progressive Caucus, fighting for the things I care about, and feel very privileged to be the first South Asian American woman in the House, and creating hopefully many opportunities so that I'm not the last.
Thanks to both of you. I think having even known parts or a good amount of both of those stories, I feel like I always learn something new hearing it. Congressman Bera, when you started out, you were the only South Asian member of Congress. How has your role changed as you've now have, you know, 3 fellow South Asian colleagues joining you? And I guess for both of you, now that you've all kind of been together in the House for the last 5-ish years, has the dynamic changed the longer you all have been serving together between all of you?
You know, so I think it's great, right? When I first was thinking about running, I actually didn't know if there had ever been a South Asian Indian American member of Congress, so I Googled it, and lo and behold, Dalip Singh Sound comes up, who was the first Asian American member of Congress back in the 1950s. That wasn't a story that we ever told in you know, our community, and it's something that we should be proud of and celebrate. And when you read about Congressman Sound's life story, it's pretty inspirational. I mean, to an issue that Pramila is a fighter for immigration. Obviously, Judge Sound was a trailblazer in that area, you know, fighting for Asian Americans to get the rights to become citizens, and ultimately then he was able to run for Congress. And then Bobby Jindal served 2 terms, and then, you know, when I first got elected, I remember you know, one of the first public events that I did within diaspora said, look, there's no reason that over this next decade we can't go from 1 South Asian member of Congress to 5. Well, it didn't take us a decade. You know, in 2016, you know, we got Pramila, Raja, Rowe, and Vice President Harris, and then Senator Harris. So we got there in 4 years. And fast forward to, you know, this last election cycle, we had great candidates running all around the country. Harold Tippernenny in Arizona, Sri Kulkarni, and you're seeing, you know, great members, you know, not giving up and running. You're seeing more state legislators, city council members, supervisors. So I think it's an exciting time, you know, and again, I think it is our opportunity to give back from our life experience, our values, and I think America is better for that.
Yeah, I guess I would say that, you know, I have the picture up on my wall of Ami, Raja, Rowe, and me on the floor when we were sworn in. It was a really wonderful moment, I think. And there was a lot of attention across the country on the fact that we now had 4 South Asian Americans in Congress. And I just always think that our being here is not just about what we can do. And there is a lot of things, you know, things that we are all fighting for and that we want to achieve, but it's also about how people see their futures differently. And so, you know, after I left the state Senate, the fact that I ran for office inspired a whole bunch of Indian American women, to actually immigrants in general, to run. And so I was the only woman of color when I was in the state Senate. Now I think we have 5 women of color in the state Senate. And we have, I think now 5 South Asian Americans in the state legislature. When I was there, I was the first one. And so, you know, the work that we do to kind of build the leadership ladders, and that's why I like this event, because it's about saying to people, look, you also, not that you have to run for office, but if you want to, there is a path here. And it was a really wonderful thing to be elected at the same time as Kamala Harris and what was otherwise such a dismal night. It was really hard to celebrate our victories. That was the same night Trump was elected. But Kamala and I were both elected, and we introduced several. In fact, I was just talking to her the other day. My access to counsel bill passed. That was the first bill I introduced, the first bill she introduced. We were both at the airport. And now to see her as vice president, and I feel like I say Madam Vice President as many times as I can in a conversation, because it is so important that we recognize where we as a country and we as multiple communities that she represents with her identities, where we have come to and how much more we can still do. So I think that's been a really wonderful thing.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So we've gone from, like you just said, Congressman, we've gone from one member of Congress to now we had 4 House members and a senator, and now we have, the 4 of you in the House and a vice president. Every election year, like you both mentioned, we're seeing a new kind of record number of South Asian Americans running in elections at all levels, all across the country, really from all parties. But can you both, I guess, just tell us your thoughts on how, as a South Asian American community, and the work that so many folks across the nation are doing to build kind of this political power of our community. What are your thoughts on how we can best grow the political power of the South Asian American community?
Do you want to start, Pramila, and then I'll?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that has been really great to see is the growth of the organization Impact, which I think has been doing a lot of work to both help candidates, but also to just push voter engagement and civic engagement more broadly. And so I think that the key thing here is to really get people engaged, understanding the political process, voting, and getting, doing the things that make them feel excited about our democracy. That's what's so great about democracy, is it bends and it shapes to the people who put their hands on it. The people who engage with it can make a difference. And so I think that is the most important message. And whether that is running for office, whether that is running an organization, whether that is doing voter registration work, whether that's in getting involved in campaigns, all of those things are important. And I think there is a place for everyone to do any one of those things. For young people, because I know Desis for Progress has a lot of young folks, getting your families engaged is something that I've seen happen. I was a big Bernie Sanders fan. I think that's no surprise to anybody. And I would go to fundraisers with Indian Americans, and it was hilarious because all the young people were there because they love Bernie Sanders and they wanted to talk to me about Bernie Sanders. And all the parents were like, that's a little bit too progressive for us. And so, they were perhaps with another candidate, but it was wonderful to see people engaging. And that's what makes me really excited. We've had so many interns coming through our office, South Asian American interns, and people are brilliant. They are dedicated. They have so much to contribute. And I love seeing people across the country running. Just have to give a shout out to my sister, who decided she was going to run for office a couple of years after I did, and is now a county commissioner in Multnomah County, Oregon. So, whether it's in the family sort of narrowly, or whether it's in the family broadly, as in South Asians, we celebrate those successes for people across the country.
Yeah, and I would play off of what Pramila said. I was an intern on Capitol Hill in 1985 for Senator Alan Cranston, who was our senator at that time. I don't recall seeing anyone who looked like me, and very few Asian Americans on the Hill. So fast forward to, Nisha, you mentioned that you came through our office as a fellow, and the number of interns and just the number of staff and chiefs of staff that are on the Hill. The folks, if you look at the folks in the administration, certainly we saw a lot of South Asians in the Obama administration, but if you look at the high levels of folks that are filling out the Biden administration, obviously we'd like to see more AAPI representation. I'll put that out there, and but the fact that we're actively fighting to get that representation, that we're able to do that, I think that matters. And then, just in the 10 years that I've been a candidate or a member of Congress, we're starting to get a level of political sophistication as a community. And what I mean by that is, it's not just supporting candidates. If you look at the 2 Georgia special elections, the South Asian community, but also the broader AAPI community, organized and recognized that, hey, there's these pockets of, if we could just turn out an extra 1,000 votes here or there, we could have an impact. And given how close those races were, while neither candidate was South Asian or Asian American, we had a real impact in turning out record numbers of Asian American, South Asian voters that give us this opportunity to have the White House, to have the Senate, and to have the majority in the House. And then the last thing is, since in the time of virtual events and grassroots organizing, I do a lot of events with our colleagues who are not South Asian, but like a Mikey Sherrill or Tom Malinowski in New Jersey, where they have large groups of South Asians. So you can go in there and make sure they're being introduced to the South Asian community, to their constituents, and help elevate them. And again, making sure our community gets out there and votes. And our democracy, your vote is your voice. And we haven't always voted in proportional numbers. I think that's changing. And what we saw in 2020, we can't let that go. We've got to out-organize everyone and make sure our voters go out there and vote.
Thank you. So since the last time we've had this event, we have Democrats now controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House. So that's a change since the last time. But I wanted to just ask about, so all of you, the two of you, and Congressman Khanna, Congressman Krishnamoorthi, all being South Asian Democrats, it's I think no secret you each occupy a different space on the political spectrum, so to speak, and have differing approaches to various issues. While we have all three, House, Senate, White House, can you talk a little bit about, give us your thoughts on working with those within the Democratic Party who may have a different approach than you, and even working with kind of amongst each other, being kind of at different places?
You want to start, Pramila, and then?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I keep waiting to see, but yeah, so I chair the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and I think one of the things that's been really great lately is we've been doing so much across the Democratic Caucus that we have agreement on. I feel like, I sometimes say that, Ami may not agree with me, but that progressives are the first to the best and most just idea. And then we have to fight for it. We have to fight like hell for it sometimes. But then eventually the country gets there, whether it was $15 minimum wage, which, I was on the committee that passed a $15 minimum wage back in 2014. We are finally at the place where we've got the president and the House and hopefully the Senate now ready to pass a $15 minimum wage. Community college, free community college. Tonight, the president's going to announce that his family's plan includes free 2-year community college and trade schools. I introduced that bill in 2016, and I now have the College for All bill, which is for free 2-year and 4-year public colleges. So I think that sometimes we just have to wait for those tipping point moments, but the pandemic and the economic instability and the racial inequity has really shined a light on all of the inequities that exist. And I feel like there's a new urgency within the Democratic Party to take on many of these issues, led by a president who's far bolder and more progressive than I thought he would be. But he has risen to that occasion, in my view, and he put forward a really bold American Rescue Plan. Now he's putting forward bold jobs plans and family plans. Of course, we're going to push for more because there are things that we think aren't in there. But that's our job, is to push for the thing that we think people need. In the House Democratic Caucus, I'll just give you one example of how progressives worked with frontliners most recently on a letter to the president and vice president that was about making sure we take bold action on pharmaceutical drug pricing and making sure that people can afford drugs in this country in the midst of a pandemic, something that's been an issue for a long time, even more so of an issue now. And then using the hundreds of billions of dollars of savings to lower the Medicare eligibility age to 60, as the president has said he wants to do, and to add dental, vision, and hearing into the Medicare benefits. And that has been a progressive priority for a long time. Obviously, I'm the sponsor of Medicare for All. That's where I think the healthcare system in the country should go. But in the meantime, lowering the Medicare eligibility age is so popular across the country. And so we worked with Jared Golden, who's in one of the toughest districts in the country in Maine, with Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, with Cindy Axney in Iowa, And it's this wonderful collaboration of frontline Democrats in the most vulnerable district and progressive caucus members and New Dems and Blue Dogs, people across the Democratic spectrum saying, yes, 90 of us at the last count want to see us focus on this because it's the right thing to do. And by the way, it's incredibly popular. So I think we're getting more of those opportunities to work together. And just one final observation on this, sometimes the thing that's hard about Congress is you don't really have a chance to get to know people. And as awful as January 6th was, and I was trapped in the gallery for the insurrection, it also in some ways created a whole different space for us to get to know each other. I created a gallery group of members across the ideological spectrum of the caucus who were all trapped in the gallery because we desperately needed to talk to each other about what we went through and deal with the trauma of it. And it has really created some wonderful relationships that I think may not have been possible in any other situation. So I'm an optimist. I like to look at silver linings, and it's been a really tough year. But that is one silver lining, is I feel like I've gotten to know at quite a deep level some of my colleagues that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten to know. And I think all of that helps to put forward a really bold, unifying agenda that we can all sign on to and be proud of.
And I'll just add, I actually don't think the Democratic Party or the Democratic caucus as a caucus is really that far apart on a lot of the issues. We may be apart on how we address the issues, but on a values-based proposition, I think we all believe that everyone who has the desire and the ability to go to college should be able to go to college, and cost shouldn't be the prohibitive factor. That every American, if they get sick, ought to be able to go see a doctor, and they should never fear bankruptcy if they get really sick. They should be able to access the care that is necessary. That we ought to be investing in a more fair and equitable economy so that if you work harder, you can climb the ladder and you can be rewarded. And I think we all recognize the inequality and the concentration of wealth or in the hands of a few. I think many of us want to see some of the monopolies that are existing in healthcare delivery and technology, et cetera, that I think really have taken us in a wrong direction. We'd like to address that and create a more competitive framework. I was an early Joe Biden supporter, and I myself am even President Biden's risen to the occasion. I mean, and I think it is this particular moment in time, 4 years of Donald Trump, who was clearly the most divisive president of our lifetime and played on these divisions to further divide the country. The racial injustice that we saw, both under the Trump administration, but then the very vivid murder of George Floyd, and the aftermath of the social justice movement, racism in America. You can't put that back in a box. It's right out there. So let's deal with it. The pandemic, the income inequality that it exposed, the healthcare inequities that it exposed, the communities of color. So we're having the beginnings of an honest conversation about race in America. We got a long ways to go. There are going to be uncomfortable conversations, but shame on us if we, as your elected leaders, don't rise to the occasion and have these honest conversations. As gun violence, police reform. Those are all important conversations that we have to have. And I think the media likes to play on divisions and try to amplify things. I don't actually think we as a caucus, and Pramila touched on something. I think January 6th did bring us together almost as a family. It also exposed the Republican Party. I mean, I have built a career on trying to be bipartisan. There's not a governing philosophy in the Republican Party right now. It's just not there. At this moment in time, I'd love the Republicans to work with us, but we've got to do what we've got to do for the American people. And I think that's what you saw in the American Rescue Plan. I think that's what you'll hear tonight. And again, I think, knowing Vice President Biden fairly well, I think he'd love Republicans to work with us. But if they're not going to, we have an obligation to the American people to do what we have to do and what they elected us to do.
Awesome, thank you. Congresswoman Jayapal, I know you'll have to hop off. You'll have to hop off in just a minute. But before you do, just, especially being the only South Asian American woman in Congress, what can you, are there any unique challenges you faced in that? And also, before you go, what advice do you have to South Asian women about getting, civically or politically engaged?
My advice is do it. We need your voices. We need your energy. We need your smarts. We need your brilliance. We need your perspective. There aren't enough of us as women in general. And then, of course, as South Asian American women. And so I feel every day kind of I get so many, really smart, talented women that come through the office. And my advice is listen to yourself. If my path tells you anything, it's that you can break away from whatever the norms might be, the expectations might be for you. If they're not your expectations, follow your heart and do everything you do with confidence that you have something very important to contribute. And I think the lesson that we often get as Black, Brown, Indigenous folks, as people who may not have had as much money as others around us growing up, or as people who, maybe weren't so-called destined for these roles, is you can get here anyway. We are really hard workers. We immigrants, we know how to work hard. And I think that there are just so many opportunities for people to engage. So unique challenges as a woman, I wrote about some of these in my book, Use the Power You Have, A Brown Woman's Guide to Politics and Political Change. There are a lot. This is a very male-oriented place. Many of our Republican colleagues are just outright hostile to women or to the issues that women face. But we have a lot of support in our caucus from both men and women, and we have a lot of support from the country, most importantly. And so don't ever, ever doubt who you are. Don't let anyone talk down to you. If somebody is undermining you, it's because you make them feel insecure. So just keep staying strong, stay bold, and do the things you love. It eventually will work out.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And as someone who has already read your book, it was wonderful and appreciate it. I know you'll have to jump off at some point. So before, in case we're still chatting about other things, thank you again so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Nisha. And thank you, Ami, and to everybody. It was so great to join you. Take care.
Awesome. So Congressman Bera, we have a lot of questions that have come in. And so I know we'll have Congressman Krishnamoorthi joining us shortly to speak a little bit with the group as well. But a couple of audience questions. The first one is, what was your biggest challenge in running for office and how did you overcome it?
So the biggest piece was that you're nuts. You've never run for office before, and now you're going to run for Congress. How are you going to do it? And it was honest feedback, because in truth, what folks were saying was correct. So it's overcoming your own initial fear of failure. And had you asked me when I first started running, what my probability of winning was, I'd say that's probably like 5 or 10%. But it would be 0 had I not tried. And just kind of getting out there, learning about it, asking questions. So if you feel like there's something that you're called to do, and at that moment, it was a crazy idea, but I felt compelled to do it. And again, some of that was probably the enthusiasm around Barack Obama's election and wanting to be part of how do we move this country forward in a way that I'd like to see it. And I loved it. I loved the public engagement. I loved being out there. And what came together, it was amazing, when total strangers are just showing up in a field office, making phone calls on behalf of you. And, I vividly, when my parents came up right before that first election and they saw all these folks, just the excitement in their eyes, as again, to see total strangers working on behalf of their son, that was super exciting. So, and anyone can do this. As Pramila said, it takes hard work. You got to put yourself out there, but understand why you're doing it, and that makes a difference. And now we're joined by Congressman Krishnamoorthi, who is famous for the nomenclature of the Samosa Caucus.
That's right. Welcome, Congressman Krishnamoorthi. Glad to have you join us.
Hey, thank you, Nisha. And how are you doing, Ami? I love that. That is the coolest bookcase I have seen.
The venerated 10 out of 10 on Room Rater.
I love it, man. And you can't have a better warm-up act than Ami Bera for anybody. So I don't know what he said about me. I'm sure he got you fired up or warmed up. I'm not sure what he said.
No, we just lost Pramila, so you joined right at the right time. So
okay, awesome.
Well, I've been throwing out some questions. We have some that I had asked Congressman Bera and Congressman Jayapal already, a couple from the audience, but one that is really for both of you, and Congressman Krishnamoorthi, you can certainly start, but we're talking about each of you having your own, all four of you as the South Asian members having your own specific districts, right, in California and Illinois, and Washington for Congresswoman Jayapal. And in addition to representing your constituents, you're all, all four of you are also seen as representatives of the Indian American and the broader South Asian community in Congress as well. So can you talk about having the importance of having this kind of representation for our communities, but also, how you balance that, being one of the four, right, and being kind of a representation of our communities, but also doing your job for your constituents as well?
Well, that's a great question. And, the way I look at it is, I think part of the reason, I think the reason why, people like Ami and myself got elected is because of our values. And as you know, our values were shaped by our upbringing and our culture and our heritage. And so I think on the vast majority of issues, because we're kind of speaking from a place of our, of who we are, so to speak, there's very little in terms of any conflict or tension in terms of where we stand on an issue and how it would, resonate, in the broader community versus how it resonates in the Indian American community. I think there is sometimes, perhaps a little bit of an emphasis or focus that sometimes the Indian American community would like to bring to an issue that perhaps the broader constituency may not be as aware of or focused on. I'll just take one issue, which is, I've done a lot on H-1B reform. And I feel that that particular issue is important not only for the 700,000 Indians who are in the people of Indian origin who are in the backlog, who I think are really deserving of a quicker pathway to a green card and citizenship. But it's also important for our economy as a whole that these people stay here, invest their money in starting new businesses and employing Americans and creating more wealth and prosperity for everyone. However, that's obviously it's viewed by a lot of people as a little bit of a niche issue. And so you just have to kind of spend the appropriate time on that relative to the other issues that you're dealing with, and explain to all audiences how important it is. But overall, I just find that it's crucial that we be true to ourselves. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we just have to be true to our values and who we are, and bring our authentic selves to the table when we're talking about anything. And if we do, and we explain, for instance, why I spent the weekend on the issue of getting vaccines to India, and other places, people understand, and they're fine with that. And you just have to make sure that you are speaking from your own truth.
You know, let me just play off a little bit of Raja just said, because you just saw this play out in real time with the tragedy that's unfolding in India with the pandemic. Obviously, as a senior member on the Foreign Affairs Committee and someone who does global health, we've been pushing the administration on the issue of vaccine diplomacy, the importance that we've now secured enough vaccine doses for our domestic population. We've got to show global leadership because, again, we don't defeat this pandemic until we vaccinate the world. And what happens in India or Brazil matters to what's happening here. But in this specific case, I'm sure Raja was hearing from a lot of folks. I was hearing from folks. And we were watching this tragedy unfold rather quickly. I followed Raja and Rose's public statements, and I was on the phone, pretty constantly from the end of last week with folks at the White House, pleased that they got to that place on Sunday and are stepping up, because India is a geopolitical strategic ally of the United States as we kind of lay out our 21st century foreign policy national security framework. And so this was important. And then for us here in our state of California is now sending supplies directly to India as well. And I think it did matter that there were members of Congress of South Asian descent that could strongly emphasize that case. I think it does matter that I'm chair the subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific, and that chairmanship role carries a lot of weight because you're talking to the Tony Blinkens of the world and Jake Sullivans and others, and that matters. Having that representation matters. So, and I think it matters to the diaspora.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm glad you both talked about that. I know that's something that has been on the minds of a lot of our communities, especially over this last weekend and the days before that, as we see what's unfolding in India, unfortunately. Taking a slightly different turn in conversation, we have an audience question, and I should mention to everyone watching, we've got a lot of questions and not likely to make it through most, but we'll do the best we can. Would love to know your thoughts about the pros and cons of remote legislating. Do you feel like you're more efficient with your time? And in a post-COVID world, how important do you think the face-to-face experiences are to getting the job done and building relationships? And that's to either of you that wants to go first.
Sure. Should I go first, Ami?
Go ahead, Roger.
I think that it's going to be interesting after the pandemic, like what kind of tools that we might have used a lot during the pandemic continue to kind of continue after the pandemic. Do we have hybrid hearings, for instance? Do we have briefings by Zoom and so forth? I think we will to some degree, certainly during our district work periods or whatever they're called these days. I think we might have a little more activity, quite frankly, during those times when we were otherwise more focused on the district in terms of doing committee work, because we now know how to do it. All that being said, I do think there's going to be two things that I think are going to happen after, which is going to be, there's going to have to be a real examination of voting and how to do that virtually. I'm talking about voting on the floor. Proxy voting is okay, but it's not really it's very clunky, and it's not really that great at the end of the day. You want to be voting yourself, and God forbid we're in an even more disastrous situation than we were this time around with the pandemic. We have to be able to virtually vote. I think that's something that's going to have to be figured out and hashed out and so forth. And then the other thing is, I do think that we are going to come back to normal by at some point in the near future. We're going to probably have some kind of a vaccination rule, and make sure everyone's vaccinated and coming back and doing our business. Just because I do think there's a lot of efficiency from being able to meet together in person for committee work, or even for any other business. So there's probably going to be something like that. That's just my hunch.
Yeah, and I would just briefly play off. I think just like any other aspect, in healthcare delivery, you're going to continue having telemedicine, telehealth. You'll continue to have virtual education in some sense, hybrid format. So I think we'll continue to meet with folks, in a more efficient way, sometimes remotely. But I also think there's something that we lose by not being together on the floor of the House. It's so much easier to go find a colleague that you're looking for, pull them aside and say, hey, here's a bill idea, or I need a piece of information. And I know you're the one that has that. And I think that camaraderie really is important to our ability to legislate. And I think that translates to, I think we'll do virtual briefings, but I think the hearings will come back into the hearing rooms, because that's the group of folks that you really get to know on your committees and your subcommittees, and where you become content experts. So I think that'll come back. Our voting schedules, what that looks like, that may have permanently changed, where you'll maybe group more stuff together and spend 2 weeks straight in district. But we'll see. But just like any other aspect of our lives, I think the pandemic certainly has changed things and maybe accelerated some trends that probably would have happened anyways.
Thank you. One kind of heavy question, and then we'll just wrap up. I know we don't have a lot of time, but a question from the audience: what can we as a community do to fight increasing polarization and racism in America?
Yes. You go
ahead.
Okay. I touched on my earlier comments that this is a moment in time, right? I mean, racism's always existed in America. It's out of the shadows. Asian American hate has, certainly always been there. We as a community often have not spoken up or stood up. Well, you're seeing, rallies all across the country, where, largely driven by a lot of young people that are speaking out, but there are a lot of the older generation that are at these rallies as well in the API community. So it's a moment in time where, we have to have these difficult conversations. We have to have honest conversations. We did something, I think last summer with DFP, where we talked about, prejudices that exist in our own community, in the South Asian community. Let's not be oblivious to that as well, that those prejudices exist in the Indian American. You have a history of a caste system and so forth. They're not easy conversations to have, but they're the right conversations to have, because if you don't talk about the elephant in the room, you can't ever address it. And this is a moment in time where, without judging one another, we should have those conversations, and we should think about how we move beyond that. And I think this is where the young generation can really help us engage in some of the really important, necessary conversations. And the questions about racism, but two issues, since we're wrapping up, two issues that I think we need the younger generation to help move our community forward, that I care passionately about within the South Asian community, is domestic violence. I think there is an epidemic of hidden domestic violence that occurs in our community. And we've got to be able to surface that and talk about it, you know, particularly with arranged marriages and so forth that happens. And then LGBTQ rights in our community, in the South Asian Indian American community. These are gonna make my parents' generation really uncomfortable, but they're necessary conversations. So to the young DFP folks out there, as John Lewis said, you know, let's get out there. Let's have these difficult conversations, because we know we have LGBTQ members in the South Asian community. We know there's domestic violence. They're uncomfortable topics, but let's talk about them. So, Roger, with that.
Well said, Ami, except I just disagree with one kind of suggestion you made, which is that you are not part of the younger generation. I don't understand why you kept referring to them in the third person. But thank you. We still include you in our generation. Hey, I think Ami said everything, you know, just perfectly. If I had to add something, it's just that I think that we need to lock arms with every community that's facing any kind of discrimination or prejudice. And we can't stand silent when anything happens to them, hoping that, you know, we are in some kind of privileged position and that it wouldn't happen to us at some point. And I think there's a little bit of that mentality in our community. And I think that we have to kind of confront that a little bit. You know, when I spent some time with, you know, my Sikh American friends. So this month is technically Sikh American Awareness Month or Heritage Month in Illinois. And it was so tragic what happened in Indianapolis a couple weeks ago, because I do think in part the killer was targeting Sikh Americans. He, you know, that was part of the equation. And just as the killer in Atlanta, he was not having a bad day. He was having a desire to kill Asian American women or Asian Americans. And at those moments, I think that our community can tend to feel somewhat comfortable and removed from what's happening. And I think those are the times when we need to make an active effort to get people speaking up and speaking out on behalf of those other communities and standing with them, because that's the only way that we're going to deal with domestic violent extremism, white nationalism, racially and ethnically motivated extremist acts. It's a real thing. And as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I can tell you that everything that might separate us or that might seem to be a difference among us pales in comparison to how certain individuals, and they're growing in number in this country, view all non-white people. We are of a piece. We are, you know, we're only shades of this color at this point. And we got to remember that, and we got to band together and stand up for really what America should symbolize or embody, which is equality. That is, and freedom and justice for everybody.
Thank you so much to both of you. We're just about at time, so we'll just ask both of you to close with whatever you'd like to let folks know, but also maybe answer this one last question. That's really, you know, we have so many folks out there getting, especially in our communities, increasingly getting civically engaged and actively involved in the political process. And especially after the last 4 years, after this last, you know, election cycle, we know, and you both certainly know how tiring that can be, especially, you know, doing your jobs in increasingly partisan and polarized environments. As you close out with any closing remarks you might have, can you also just let us know what advice you might have for folks who are, you know, getting into the thick of it, and how to handle when the going gets a little tough?
Ami?
You want to start and then I'll wrap up?
No, you can go first.
Okay. You know, I think you've seen a recurring theme here is, and it's something that our former colleague who lost, John Lewis, would say, you know, show up, stand up, but speak up. And, you know, that is a lot of this. So if there's an issue that you're passionate about, show up, stand up, and speak up about it. You know, this is a time to, you know, get out and organize. And Roger and I are Democrats, and you know, I think about where the Republican Party is right now on the heels of January 6th, and you know, very much worry about how we move forward and create space until the Republican Party can kind of find its governing coalition. But there are just some, you know, I believe in this country deeply. I believe you're going to hear, you know, part of Zoom is now there's a leaf blower outside, so you're going to hear that in the background potentially. But the strength of this country is this fabric, this tapestry of different cultures, different religions, different traditions and ethnicities, immigrants, one generation after another, woven together. And that's been the strength of the United States of America. But we're at a crossroads where there, you know, as Raja alluded to, there are elements that are not insignificant in this country that want to take us in a very different direction as well. And this is a time for all of us to show up, to stand up and to speak up, because the beauty of America is that tapestry that's woven together. It makes us very unique as a nation.
I think I would echo what Ami said. I think that what I would suggest to anybody who, you know, really wants to get involved in politics and maybe even run for office, and which I hope a lot of you consider, is, you know, we're kind of in a moment right now where I think it's kind of an inflection point for our country. January 6th, unfortunately, surfaced in a very ugly way some sentiments and some trends and some movements that had perhaps been under the surface, but all of a sudden came, you know, in front of us very vividly, violently, and is going to leave a mark on us. And I think that for a lot of people, they think the insurrection began that day. It did not conclude. And so we're in this moment where I think you have a chance to help us as a country navigate to a better place. And what that means is try to both stand up and speak up, as Ami said, for what you believe in, but also to listen and try to figure out how do you dialogue with people who might be on the other side of an issue and try to bring us to a better place in terms of solutions and in terms of civility in our politics and in terms of government getting things done. This is vital. And I think it's partly why Joe Biden is doing well right now, because people see him getting things done. They see him getting people vaccinated. They see him trying to repair the economy. But it's only a start because there's so many other challenges that have to be addressed. But it's that kind of, if you can become part of the getting things done caucus in life, then people will notice that. And people will want you to be on their team and fighting for them. And so that's what I would just encourage. Whatever you can do to be part of a solution, part of a movement, but also part of getting things done, the more power to you. And I think you'll really rise up in your ability to help people, both in your community and further than that.
Awesome. Thank you both. I know we have gone a little bit over time, and you both have a busy schedule. So I just want to thank you both again, Congressman Bera, Congressman Krishnamoorthi, for joining us. I hope we will get to do this again next year in person at our 5th annual roundtable. But again, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Nisha. Stay out of trouble, Ami.
And for the rest of you, I will make sure to, oh, sorry, Congressman, did you? Okay, he's good. I will turn it over to Victoria Meany. She is one of our board members at Desis for Progress to close us out. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you for hosting, Nisha. Obviously, our members of Congress are super busy, but we thank them again so much for being able to participate, not just in tonight's event, but also the work that they do on our behalves every single day. Thank you all that have joined us tonight. For anybody that did miss tonight's event, we will be posting a recording on YouTube in the next few days, so stay tuned for that. Of course, you can always follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And like we always say, these events are not possible without your support. So please, if you have the ability to, we are always accepting donations. You can visit our website, desisforprogress.org, and that's where you will find us. And stay tuned for a follow-up email regarding this event. Thank you all so much and have a great night.